Is Bitcoin competing with Trump coin or any other token or not? I think the last 2 weeks have been extraordinary for Bitcoin and for the strategic Bitcoin reserve because momentum is really building. I think Friday night after that summit, I think the most important thing said in this industry in 4 years was said Friday night, and I think it missed a lot of people's attention. I don't think people really realize what happened. And this is after hundreds of meetings and talking to people in the Senate, in the House, in the SEC, in the CFTC, in the White House, every industry participant, all the Bitcoin investors, all the crypto investors, all the crypto exchanges, all the policymakers. After lots of conversations and after listening to every word uttered by Gensler, by all the regulators, after listening to every minute of congressional testimony, here's my opinion. The president directed that should come to his desk by August.
Michael Saylor emphasized Bitcoin's growing momentum and its elevated status in the U.S. financial agenda. He highlighted a significant shift in perception, marked by the creation of a strategic Bitcoin reserve through a presidential executive order. This reserve treats Bitcoin as a crucial long-term asset, with the U.S. government committing to accumulate more Bitcoin while maintaining a never-sell policy. Such developments signify Bitcoin's recognition as a decentralized digital commodity, distinguishing it from other cryptocurrencies. Saylor likened Bitcoin to prime real estate, explaining its potential as a foundation for economic growth. He suggested that Bitcoin could serve as digital property, enabling governments and corporations to rent, finance, or build on it, creating immense value. With institutions stepping in and regulatory clarity improving, Saylor sees Bitcoin becoming an integral part of business strategies and government planning. If this momentum continues, Bitcoin may drive a transformative shift in the global economic landscape. How might Bitcoin's inclusion in national reserves impact its adoption and valuation globally? Can the concept of Bitcoin as digital property reshape traditional financial systems?
I've been watching the industry for the past 4 years or so, and I think there's been a lot of confusion, a lot of controversy, a lot of conflict, and confrontation that was all unnecessary. And it was unnecessary because of a sort of a lack of vision and a lack of creativity amongst the policy makers and the participants. So, for example, in a world where the only assets that exist are securities and commodities, and in a world where it's impossible for any innovator to issue a security, then everything has to be a commodity. And that means a token is a commodity, a currency is a commodity, a tokenized security is a commodity, and a commodity is a commodity. So what we had was people very confused, thinking, well, is Bitcoin a currency competing with the dollar? Or is Bitcoin something different, a store of value competing with gold? And then is Bitcoin competing with Trump coin or any other token or not? And what's the next Bitcoin? And so I think the crypto industry was at odds. A lot of people that want to be issuers of tokens are forced to go through this kabuki dance of pretending they're decentralized when they don't really want to be decentralized. What they want to do is access the capital markets. I think the last 2 weeks have been extraordinary for Bitcoin and for the strategic Bitcoin reserve because momentum is really building. 2 weeks ago, there were 3 priorities, or there were 3 things talked about in the digital assets universe. A stablecoin act, right? The Genius bill, and a bill to create stable coins and issue them in the U.S. And that really addresses the digital currency asset class. And then there's discussion of a market structure bill, and that's to create an entire digital assets framework, presumably to issue something akin to digital tokens or tokenized securities, digital securities. And then there is the strategic Bitcoin bill, or the Bitcoin Act. That was the 3rd priority. And it was a question mark of where that was in DC. There was support, but people were wondering. What happened in the past 2 weeks is the strategic Bitcoin reserve got elevated to a primary, if not the primary priority, with the executive order. So the president created it. And I think there are some very important things that happened. On Thursday night, about a week ago, the president issued the executive order creating the strategic Bitcoin reserve. And in the executive order designated just Bitcoin to go in the reserve, said we should never ever sell it, don't sell the Bitcoin, and then directed the Secretary of Commerce and Treasury to look for budget neutral ways to acquire more Bitcoin. That was the strongest endorsement of any asset, I don't know, in 100 years, I think, by a president of the United States. You could imagine if the president has said, I'm directing the government to acquire silver and never sell it, and I want to buy more silver, or pick any asset, it would have been an extraordinary announcement. I think that was followed up by the Digital Assets Summit. And in the Digital Assets Summit, the president reiterated those points, and the Secretary of the Treasury and the Secretary of Commerce and Small Business Administration all were present and reiterated their support. That actually was quite amazing, along with all of the industry leaders being in one place at one time, and of uniform mind. I think Friday night, after that summit, I think the most important thing said in this industry in 4 years was said Friday night, and I think it missed a lot of people's attention. I don't think people really realized what happened. For 4 years, Gary Gensler at the SEC implied that, in 100 different ways, implied that Bitcoin is a commodity and nothing else is. But he implied it in a fairly obscure fashion that was kind of not very constructive, because he implied it by suing everybody.
Michael Saylor highlighted a pivotal moment for Bitcoin as it gains unprecedented momentum in the U.S. financial landscape. The establishment of a strategic Bitcoin reserve, authorized by a presidential executive order, underscores its recognition as a vital, long-term national asset. This move not only validates Bitcoin as a decentralized digital commodity, but also sets it apart from other cryptocurrencies. Saylor emphasized that the government's commitment to accumulating Bitcoin, paired with a directive to avoid selling it, marks a historic shift in how digital assets are perceived and integrated into economic strategies. Saylor also drew a parallel between Bitcoin and prime real estate, portraying it as a foundational digital asset that can generate economic value through innovative use rather than liquidation. By embracing Bitcoin as digital property, businesses and governments could unlock immense financial potential, fostering new opportunities in lending, investment, and infrastructure. With growing institutional interest and regulatory clarity, Bitcoin's role in shaping the future economy is accelerating, promising profound implications for both traditional finance and the broader global market.
David Sachs, the crypto czar, went on the All In podcast. And on the All In podcast, he said unequivocally that the U.S. government only recognizes one crypto asset as being decentralized. So what Sachs said was Bitcoin is a decentralized asset, a store of value. That's why it's in the strategic Bitcoin reserve. It's the only one. And so what you had was a member of cabinet responsible for digital assets policy, in essence providing very clear guidance that Bitcoin is a digital commodity, an asset without an issuer. And that's the policy of the United States and the President of the United States. And of course, the President directed that should come to his desk by August. He said, I want to see it by August. He's actually said in the first executive order, he said within 6 months, so by late July.
So Michael, if I'm understanding this, you don't think any other cryptocurrency qualifies to be in a strategic reserve in the United States other than Bitcoin because of its decentralization and it has no issuer?
I think there's only one universally acknowledged digital commodity in the world.
Okay.
Right? There's only one. There's Bitcoin. I've said that, right? There is no second best. I've implied that and said that, and I've spent $33 billion based on that. So, Yeah, it was my view 4.5 years ago, there's one digital commodity. But Christine, there's a more important point here. Even if there was a second, third, and fourth, like let's take the fork wars, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Satoshi Vision. Even if you fork Bitcoin and you maintain that's a commodity, they're all going to zero if the use case is store of value or cap or money, right? Because if you were to fork Bitcoin and claim it's decentralized, the free market is going to pick the strongest network and it's going to be monetized and everything else is going to zero. So it doesn't matter from a practical point of view. My position is not that you couldn't theoretically create another digital commodity. It's a very powerful financial lever. And the companies in the United States, like my company, they're capitalizing on Bitcoin. They're going to be worth $20 to $40 trillion just on their Bitcoin assets if they continue to capitalize. So understood as digital capital, Bitcoin is enriching the corporations and the government itself, depending upon how much Bitcoin those entities own. That's the first metaphor. The second metaphor is Bitcoin is digital property. If you think of it as gold or cheese, nobody rents their cheese or mortgages their cheese. But when you think of it as owning 100 acres in Manhattan, if your family owned 100 acres of Manhattan 100 years ago and you owned it this year, and I asked you, what's your family doing with it? How are you going to pay your bills? You wouldn't say, well, we're going to sell our property in Manhattan. You would say, we're going to rent it, we're going to develop a building on it, or we're going to borrow against it, we're going to finance it. And so you would generate billions and billions of dollars off of 100 acres of real estate in Manhattan without ever selling it. It's property. And so Bitcoin as property means you will be able to rent it, finance it, or build businesses on top of it in the cyber economy. That would be worth $10 trillion to the United States in 2045 each year. Right? We could generate $10 trillion off of the digital property that the United States buys in the strategic Bitcoin
pay off
reserve.
The national debt?
Well, you wouldn't be a national debt. You would basically flip from being a net debtor to a net creditor, and you would generate yield.
Michael Saylor highlighted a groundbreaking shift in Bitcoin's role, with the U.S. government officially adopting a strategic Bitcoin reserve. This marks Bitcoin's transition from a speculative asset to a cornerstone of national economic strategy. The executive order prioritizing Bitcoin accumulation and its classification as the only decentralized digital commodity underscore its growing importance. Saylor likened Bitcoin to prime real estate, emphasizing its potential for generating long-term value without being sold. With institutions and governments embracing Bitcoin, its role in financial systems is expanding, paving the way for innovation, investment, and a stronger digital economy. How will this government-backed Bitcoin strategy reshape global markets? What new opportunities could businesses explore as Bitcoin gains official recognition? Share your thoughts in the comments.